The following podcast series is a production of Building Bridges of Asheville, North Carolina. This series presents in-depth discussions examining systemic racism in the Asheville area and the triumphant stories of Black citizens. On today's episode, our host, Building Bridges co-chair Stephanie Jones-Byrne, is joined by peer mediation and mentoring professional Tyrone Greenlee as they examine systemic racism in education.
Hello, Tyrone Greenlee. So I want to start by just asking you to introduce yourself to our viewers or listeners and tell us a little bit about your background and your relationship to education and how you came to be where you are today.
Okay. My name is Tyrone Greenlee. And how I got to be where I am today is an interesting story. I've been involved with Building Bridges since 1993. And the way that happened was I used to be a church staff person many years ago. And my pastor at the time, Reverend O.T. Toms, who's unfortunately passed away just earlier this year, was involved with Building Bridges, brought Building Bridges to our church. And so I started out being a person who was just a staff person who helped with the registration and things that going on with Building Bridges. And I got involved with it. I mean, I got hooked, so to speak. And I realized there are so many things that I didn't know about race and racism and how it had affected me over the years. And so I became part of the steering committee, and I was on the, and also was a facilitator for many years. And so during that time, I also became involved with people at my school, Francine Delaney School for Children. And I got hired there to be part of the staff and be a mentor and mediator for young people, which I just absolutely love. And I think that, what's the other thing you asked me? what's the rest of it?
Just your to talk a little bit about your history and relationship with education, which you were just embarking on. Yeah.
Well, I think Building Bridges taught me so much in so many different areas, but it also taught me about race and racism and how education is affected by race and racism and the ways that we don't understand the faces and places and the ways that we are all being affected by racism, not only our children, but we as adults. And I think that because we are kind of living with the sin of racism, our children are also doing the same thing. And I think it's really, really important. That's why I loved the conversation that we just had, because it's so important first of all, for all of us to understand what racism is and what it looks like and what it manifests in our society, and to show up and do something about that. Show up in school board meetings and city council meetings and all of that to advocate for our young people and advocate the best outcomes for them, you know? And the achievement gap is still a huge issue. And I think I just said this a minute ago. It's like, I don't really think that we're doing anything about it right now. I think, like one of the panelists said, we're going backwards, and I believe that. I think we are going backwards. So, yeah.
So tell me a little bit more, tell us a little bit more about how you see racism showing up in education and in the lives of children and young people in general, because it's not just K through 12, obviously.
Oh, yeah. Well, one of the things I see is that young people, and I think at our school, we do a really good job of educating them, but I think a lot of them come to us not knowing their history as a school, a history as where we came from as a people, as African American people. And I think that they just don't know so much, which is crucial for them to know. But it's also about the achievement gap. It's also about graduation rates and suspension rates, and how we are as people affected very differently for those with these realities. Yeah.
You mentioned the achievement gap, which is also referred to as an opportunity gap. That has been talked about a lot here in Asheville, as you said, in Asheville in particular, Buncombe County, Western North Carolina.
Yes.
But there doesn't seem to be a lot of movement on it. The numbers seem to go in the wrong direction. And I wonder if, for anyone who's not even familiar with those terms, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what that means, and particularly for Black students in Asheville. What does that gap look like?
Well, the gap looks like our young people not achieving as they can, not achieving at the same rates as white students, and in reading and fundamentals and math, all those kinds of things. And so that's what it looks like for us as a people. And you're absolutely right. I mean, one of the things that makes me so completely crazy is that we talk so much about the achievement gap, and we're really good at having a conversation, and we're not so good at doing something about it, making a difference. And that makes me so sad for our young people, because I think there's things that we can be doing right now, but I think we're just not doing them.
Well, since you say that, please share some of your thoughts about things that we maybe could be doing to not just shrink what we call the achievement gap, which is, based on how we measure, right? And I just want to say too that when we talk about that, it's important to understand that what we're talking about, and the reason why we also call it the opportunity gap, is because it's not about any deficit in the children.
Right.
It's about the deficits in the system.
Yes, exactly.
So share a little bit about what you think maybe we can be doing, and where you think there might be opportunity for our education system to be more equitable.
Yeah, well, I think that we need to, first of all, understand how racism plays a huge part in our system, and where it shows up and how it shows up. And I think that we need to understand that parents, children, but also parents are also affected by this. And I think that we all need to understand what racism looks like and feels like. And so when it shows up someplace in our schools' lives, in our children's lives, we understand that, and we are able to advocate against it. I think the whole piece of outcomes, like how our kids graduate, how our kids are suspended or not suspended, is huge, and there's a reason. There's a reason for that. And I think if we can look at what's going on with our African American students and why there's why is there a gap, we can and start to do something about that, we can go a long way to address this gap, But again, like I said before, I think we just aren't, we're talking a lot about it, but we're not really doing much about it, And I've known lots of parents who have come to our school because the system was just not working for them. And they needed some place where there was a smaller population, and where the people and the teachers really pay attention to the students, and not only what's going on during the day, but very often what's going on at night with them, you know?
And do you see that race and racism, which are not just about, one of the things we talk about in Building Bridges, of course, is that, you know, racism isn't just this personal level kind of animosity. It's, you know, it's baked in, right, to our, to our systems, and we all come up in it. And the institutions have just, you know, developed with racism at the core, and with, you know, a sort of a white supremacist underpinning. Speak plainly, right? And this isn't the fault of, you know, that's not to say that, you know, white teachers cause the problem, but it does seem like there's one of what you're talking about has to do with fundamentally how children are treated differently based on race. And the kinds of effects that has. And the panel, you talked very eloquently about representation and what it means for kids to be able to see themselves in teachers and in other role models. And I wonder if you could speak to that a little bit as one of the ways we can make progress and try to make our systems more equitable.
Well, one of the things that I do at Francine Delaney is that I'm a mentor, and I meet with kids and talk to them about their lives and what's going on. And I'm the only one. I'm the only, and also I'm one of few people of color who is on staff here. And I think it's such a huge thing for young people to be able to look at people of color and say, I can do that, I can be that. That's achievable for me, you know? And I worry a lot about what message that we're sending to people, to young people, around what's available to them, you know? And I also wanted to say that it's important to understand that race and racism live on two levels. They live on the interpersonal level, but they also lives on the institutional level. And that because it's about who we know and who we're in relationship with, but it's also lives in our institutions. And we need to look at the institution of education and what's going on there, in addition to who's my neighbor? Do I know my neighbor? Is my neighbor white? Where do I live? That kind of thing, you know?
That's a great point, because it's not just one or the other, it's both and.
Exactly,
and we need to talk in terms of, you know, looking at the fact that this came up in the panel discussion earlier, that, you know, most Black kids will go through school with mostly white teachers. And so it's not, like I was saying before, that we're pointing fingers at white teachers for personally perpetuating racism, but for existing in a system that was built with racism in it, and coming to terms with that, unless we, you know, are honest about that, then there's not much we can do to change it. And one of our other panelists, Libby Kyles, mentioned how so much of the challenge is educating teachers to understand these things. And make more equitable spaces for kids. And what Libby said was so wonderful, because it's really hard to show up in a system that doesn't understand you, don't understand what you're going through, and then having to deal with that on top of dealing with the kids, you know, and dealing with burnout and all the kinds of things that can happen, you know. So some of the reasons why we don't see more Black teachers, or Black teachers, like you say, burn out faster. For sure, because the teachers are also dealing with their racism on the ground.
And why we have a struggle finding African-American teachers to show up in Asheville. That's another thing,
Yeah.
another manifestation.
So that's one of the, so that's one of the areas that came through in what you've been saying, what the panel is saying, is looking at teachers and how we recruit and educate and value and care for teachers, diverse teachers, as one of the solutions to making education better for kids.
Yes.
And there's a lot more, but we want to be conscientious of our time. And I want to ask you one final question, which is if you could talk about how education or how you see education overlapping and being affected by or affecting the other core areas that we talk about in building bridges, which are housing, the legal system, and healthcare. And along with education, those are the 4 areas that we spend, a week each sort of doing a little bit deeper dive into. So I wonder if you could share your thoughts on possible relationships between the areas.
That's a huge question. And
You're right, it is.
it's a big one. But I will answer by saying there's a young man, African-American young man, that's part of our school, who came to me one day and said that I want to talk to you about something. And it was right at the beginning of class, and I thought he was trying to get out of class, And so I kind of brushed him off, and I'm not going to talk to you, go to class, please. And he said, no, I need to talk to you. And he told me the story about someone in his family who was part of a shooting. And he also told me about his mother, who was quite ill and was about to have a baby and was having all kinds of issues around that. And I just realized that so much of what goes on with race and racism and housing and all those kinds of things are all interconnected. They're all a part of each other, And I realized that this young man who was, I don't want to give away too much about him, but he's about to leave us. He's in the 8th grade. He had so much on his plate to deal with, and his mother and his father and all the things that he was dealing with every day, And it was all about race and racism and where he was living and what was going on in his family and violence and all that kind of stuff. It's all interrelated. And I think if we can deal with, I don't know, I don't really know what the answer is, but I just understand that it's all interconnected, interrelated. And it's really, really important for us to talk about what's going on with race and what's going on with housing and what's going on with healthcare and all of that, because it's all a part of everybody's life every day, And now with COVID, it's even more,
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that, because examples are really powerful.
Yeah.
And to look at, the interconnectedness of, we know that where you live affects where you go to school.
Yes.
And we've part of what we discussed during Education Week is, something that comes up is the school to prison pipeline. You mentioned earlier how kids are disciplined, right? Suspension rates.
Yes.
As a metric, right? So that's something where, Black kids being suspended at a higher rate, is part of what leads to run-ins with the legal system.
Yeah, it can lead to other things, and it can be like a cycle,
Exactly. Yeah. And you mentioned, and we, when we get to healthcare, we'll be talking more about the tragically higher rates of mother and infant mortality among Black kids. So, this young man, his mother, expecting a child and having issues and knowing the tendency, that we see in healthcare just to disregard that to a larger degree, some of the complaints of Black women. Yeah, these are all things that we see statistically, but it's so important to hear the action, to have these human stories and to understand that none of us of any race are just statistics. We're people who are all operating under this system that has a racist underpinning.
Yes. And even with African American women having babies, and having babies with low birth rates, and it extends there,
Absolutely, yeah, that can be something that is, again, affects an educational experience.
Yes.
Yeah, the maternal experience, it affects, education for the child. So
right.
Yeah. So you're absolutely right that it's all connected, and education is so fundamental that it's particularly connected to everything, and it's a big challenge, a lot to fix.
It's huge. But I thank God for people like all the people building bridges who are trying to do something, trying to understand it and do something about it. That's huge. And I'm so thankful for all of you.
Well, we're thankful for you, Tyrone Greenlee. Thank you so much for speaking with me this evening, for serving on our panels, for facilitating for everything you've done for building bridges, and for joining us in what is a small piece, which is as you say, understanding more about racism and race and racism, so that we can proceed to do something. Proceed to do something about it. We've got to start with the understanding for ourselves and for our communities. So
yes.
We appreciate that so much. Appreciate you so much.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity tonight.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. Yes. Thank you for spending so much time with us.
This has been a production of Building Bridges of Asheville. For more information, please visit our website at bbavl.org.